Hello, and welcome to the Vigo County Public Library West Branch Kitchen for Flavor Bites, Fettuccine Alfredo. My name is Eric, and in this video, we're going to make a homemade fettuccine pasta and a traditional Italian Alfredo sauce based on the original recipe created by 𝓓𝓲𝓷𝓷𝓮 in Rome around 1908. Now, this sauce doesn't use cream like a modern Alfredo sauce. Instead, it's just butter, Parmesan cheese, and some water left over from cooking the fettuccine. Now, before we get to the sauce, we need to make the pasta. Pasta dough consists of just two ingredients, flour and eggs. It helps to have a pasta machine, either manual like this one, or an electric one like this that connects to a stand mixer to help roll out the pasta, making it thinner. Today, however, we will be using a traditional rolling pin. Now, this is easier than it sounds. And for me, there is something gratifying about rolling out and cutting pasta by hand. So let's gather our ingredients and our equipment and get started. When measuring out ingredients, it's preferable to weigh your ingredients rather than measuring by volume. For instance, with flour, if you use a measuring cup, you could get a different result if the flour is sifted or not, or if you pack the flour in a little more tightly, or if it's not level. So for consistency, when you're doing the recipes, it's always preferable to weigh your ingredients. We will use 250 grams of flour, and we're using all-purpose flour for this recipe. You will also need about 155 grams of eggs. For us, that is 3 whole eggs. You can use the entire egg, you can use just egg yolks, or you can do any kind of combination that you would like. The more yolks you have, the richer the pasta will be. We're now ready to make our pasta dough. Take your 250 grams of flour and pour it out onto your counter. Using a bench scraper, remove a little bit, and we'll keep this off to the side to use in case the dough is too wet and sticky. It's always easier to add flour to a wet dough than it is to add more water to a dry dough. With the flour that's left, make a nice mound, and then using 2 fingers, you're going to make a nice big crater in the middle of the pile of your flour, because we need to put our eggs into this crater and have plenty of space to mix the eggs up and to start incorporating the flour. So once you have a nice crater, you'll take your eggs and put them right in the center. Now, if you didn't make your well big enough, you can always move some flour around to block any leakage from the eggs going out of the side. Using a fork, we're going to start mixing up the eggs. As you mix the eggs, slowly start to incorporate flour from the walls of the crater. And you're looking for a wet, sticky dough. Once you've got a nice wet dough, using the fork, we're going to set the fork aside and use our hands to start incorporating the rest of the flour and the eggs. This is where having a bench scraper is handy, because you can use that to help bring the ingredients into the center of the crater while your other hand does the mixing and the kneading. It's going to be very wet and sticky, but as you incorporate the flour, it'll start to form into a dough ball. Again, use your bench scraper to help bring ingredients into the center of your pile, and continue to press down, knead, and incorporate the flour into the egg mixture. We don't want to bring in any of our extra flour yet. We still have a lot of flour left on the table. Again, we don't want the dough to be too dry. It's easier to add flour than to add liquid at this point. Rub the dough off your hands as needed. And you can use your dough ball to pick up those crumbs that you just rubbed off. So once you have a nice ball formed, you can start doing the kneading, and you may not incorporate all this flour, and that's okay. When you knead pasta dough, it's a little bit different than a bread dough. You don't want to fold in too much at a time because it makes it very difficult for it to come together. So you'll fold in maybe about a quarter of the dough, press, turn, fold in, press, turn, and you just continue doing this over and over again until you have the right consistency. Doing this by hand, this should take about 8 to 10 minutes. Here you can see our dough is becoming nice and elastic. It's smoothing out a little bit. I'm gonna knead it for about another minute. And there you have a nice kneaded pasta dough. What we do next is let this rest. It's important to let the pasta rest so that the flour can continue to hydrate and so that the gluten that you formed by kneading has a chance to relax. If you tried rolling this out right now, it would spring back and would not stretch out enough for you to actually roll out the pasta dough, and it'd be very frustrating. So we're gonna put this in a Ziploc bag or wrap it in cling film and let it sit at room temperature for about 20 to 30 minutes. After 20 or 30 minutes, remove your pasta dough from the bag and test it to see if it's ready by gently pushing with your thumb into the dough. There will be some give and the indentation should remain. Divide the dough into quarters and we'll work with one piece of dough at a time. I'm using my bench scraper to cut. You can use a sharp knife. Whatever you have handy will work just fine. Keep one piece of dough out and put the rest back into your Ziploc to make sure it doesn't dry out while you're working. When you're rolling out your dough, you'll want to keep a bowl of flour handy because we'll want to make sure that our work surface is floured and that our dough is floured because we don't want the dough sticking to the work surface or the rolling pin as we roll. So we'll start out by lightly flouring our countertop. And then we'll take our dough ball and gently push it into a flat oval shape. And with our rolling pin, we'll start rolling. Always work from the center of the dough, rolling outward. If you find the dough sticking at all, put a little more flour on the piece of dough. Turn and continue to roll. You want to try to get a nice long oval or rectangular shape. You can turn your dough over. And as your dough gets thinner and thinner, it'll want to stick a little more. So make sure you test it, put more flour down if you need to, or use the flour that's already on the counter. And continue to roll and turn until the dough is thin enough that when you pick it up, you'll be able to see your hand through it. So we're not quite ready with this piece. You want to aim for something that's square or rectangular, but no, you can always trim it and cut it at a later time. If the dough tears, you can just gently push it back together, add a little more flour, and continue to roll. If your dough starts to spring back and won't roll out anymore, you can cover it with a floured towel and let it rest for about 10 minutes to let the gluten relax a little bit more. And then when you go back to roll, it will hopefully not pull back on you. So here you can see we have a nice thin piece, and that when I hold it up, I can start to see my hand through the sheet. So this is pretty close to being ready to go for making our fettuccine. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop there with rolling. It's the thickness that I want. It's pretty even all around. There are a few imperfections, but that's okay. We're making this homemade pasta from scratch. Once you get it rolled out to the thickness that you want, you'll sprinkle some flour on a countertop. You can use a baking tray, any other surface. Put your dough down sprinkle a little more flour, rub it in, and we want to let this sit while we roll out the rest of our dough. Once you have all of your pasta dough rolled out in sheets the thickness that you'd like, it's time to cut our pasta sheets into fettuccine. Begin with one sheet and lay it on a cutting board. And we're going to roll up in loose rolls, almost like a fold, a nice cylinder of pasta. So with a sharp knife, we're going to cut this in the width that we want. For fettuccine, you're looking at about 3 to 5 millimeters, or about 1/4 of an inch, but this is also entirely up to you. You can go a little thinner, a little thicker. The choice is yours. So with your knife, make your cuts. And the key is to be consistent in your width, whatever you decide to do. And once you get all your pasta cut, you'll unroll the pieces. And you can see that I have some that were on the ends that are a little misshapen. And that's okay, you can cook them up and eat them. They make good noodles as well. And if you didn't roll this too tight, these should just unroll nice and easy. And now that you have your fettuccine unrolled, you can roll it into a nice little nest of noodles and set it off to the side on a floured countertop while you cut the rest of your pasta. Now that the fettuccine has been rolled out and cut, we're ready to cook the pasta and make the Alfredo sauce. It's very important to have everything that you need ready to go because this sauce cooks very quickly. So we have our pasta and a pot of boiling water that's large enough to accommodate all the pasta that we're making. We have salt that will go in the water, and we have a ladle that we will use to transfer the pasta water to the sauce. Over here we have a large saute pan. Now this needs to be big enough where we can toss the pasta with our sauce. We have a 1/4 pound or 4 ounces of grated Parmesan cheese. If you buy pre-grated Parmesan cheese, it won't melt as well, so it's important to grate it fresh from a block. We also have 1 stick or a 1/4 pound of butter. You will also need tongs or a pasta spoon to transfer the fettuccine from the pasta water to the saucepan and to stir and toss everything together. Once your water is boiling, we'll want to add salt. You'll want to use more than you normally would for dried pasta when you're cooking fresh homemade pasta. Once the water returns to a boil, we're going to add the fettuccine to the pot. While we're waiting for that, we'll go ahead and add the butter to our saute pan and turn it on medium. You want the butter to melt and be nice and hot when we're ready to put the fettuccine in, but you don't want it to burn. Once your salted water returns to a boil, we'll want to add our pasta. And then we'll use our tongs or our pasta spoon to stir it around while we wait for the water to come back up to temperature. Now, fresh homemade pasta cooks much faster than dried store-bought pasta. This will take about 1.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes to cook. We want the pasta to be firm when bitten into, or al dente. If you cook it too long, it'll become mushy and soggy and won't hold up well to the sauce. When your pasta is done cooking, you'll want to transfer the pasta using your tongs or a pasta spoon to the melted butter. Now it's okay that some of the water gets in because we will be transferring some of the pasta water to the sauce anyway. Then you want to toss the fettuccine in the butter and coat it before we start adding the cheese. Once your fettuccine is coated with the butter, we'll start adding the Parmesan cheese 1 handful at a time. After you add a handful, you'll want to stir it around, toss it with the pasta and the butter, and let it melt. And after a couple of handfuls of Parmesan, you'll also want to add a spoonful or ladleful of the pasta water to help all the ingredients combine to make a nice creamy sauce. Keep tossing the pasta with the sauce and add Parmesan, another handful at a time. The sauce will thicken as you cook it and as you add the Parmesan cheese. If the cheese is not melting, it's clumpy, or if the sauce is not coating the noodles well, you can add a little more pasta water. And once you get the Alfredo sauce to a consistency that you like, it's nice and smooth and silky and coats all the pasta, you'll want to put it on your serving plates or bowls if you prefer. And there you have it, a traditional homemade fettuccine Alfredo. You can have this as a meal just by itself, or you can add vegetables or any meat that you would like. The important part is to enjoy. Thank you for joining us here at Flavor Bites. We look forward to seeing you next time.